So you've made it through Hello World. Now, this lecture you're going to learn a little bit more about what you can do with your form and your programming. And so we begin now with learning more of the meat of programming. So more about the forms and controls. So you know that Visual Studio isn't applications, which is your programs. It starts by creating the GUI. So when you're designing your program, start first by thinking about what your program has to do, and then design the GUI first. So which you do in the designer window. Here, let me pull it up. Just make sure I'm in here. So start by designing whatever the GUI is, which this is the designer window, so it says design up here in the toolbar. After you design the GUI, because you've decided what the program has to do, what are the inputs and outputs, then you'll go underneath and you'll write the code, whatever the code is going to be for that program. When you start a new project, you've noticed that some things are automatically created for you. So this is a new blank project right here. You have a blank form object right here. So a form is an object. You have a blank form object, and already Visual Studio creates for you some code underneath. So we're going to talk about what exactly is this code underneath that you're automatically given right from the start. This actually makes our life much easier working in this IDE of Visual. So I note here in the PowerPoint slides that you should rename all the default objects and controls to meaningful names. We will spend a fair amount of time doing that right now. And then you're going to have to follow some naming conventions and some coding conventions and some rules when you rename all of these objects. So I think this next slide is just a reminder for me of how you change things. So let me just show you. I'm actually going to start a new application right from the start so that you can see what needs to be done. Let's create a new application. A new project. We want a Windows Form application right here. There's our Windows Form application. And if you notice down below, let me get this in the window here. If you notice down below, the Forms application is automatically given a default name, Windows Form Application 1. And make sure you check this sign down here, create a directory. Well, I say you have to rename everything right from the start. So I'm going to call this new form application a better Hello World, for lack of anything. Now let's say Hello World Enhanced. And in your homework assignments, when you're doing these, you're going to give a meaningful name to your form. It needs to start with a noun, it needs to be a capital letter, and it needs to be what we call Pascal casing. So notice Hello World, the H is capitalized, the W is capitalized, and the E is capitalized, and everything else is lowercase. This is called Pascal casing. The other thing you need to do is you need to have your name on it. So there's mine, Pervinis. So my new form is going to be called Hello World _Pervinis. This is how you need to name your files. And this is how I expect to see it when it's submitted to me. This is part of our coding standards. Okay, so say OK. So now it's created this new form, and if I view code, I automatically see that the namespace right here, the namespace is Hello World Enhanced _Pervinis. So I've already saved myself one little piece of renaming that we have to do. So another thing that we have to rename is we have to rename this Form 1 object that we're using. It's not nice to call it Form 1. So to rename it, right click on it and it will say rename. And then I can just type. I'm going to call it probably the same thing, Hello World. Sometimes I like to say what kind of object it is that I'm renaming. So Hello World Enhanced Form. It is a form. This object is a form. And I like to append what type of object it is on the name just because it helps keep my coding clear. Again, I'm what's called Pascal casing, capital H, capital W, capital E. So it's a Hello World enhanced form. This object is a form that I just renamed. So I'm going to apply that right now. So right from the start, I've renamed things that I have to rename. So there's a lot more that we're going to have to do with the coding standards, but that's a start. There is another way I could have renamed a form. I showed you the right-click way back on the viewing the code. If I select the form, see it's selected, see the dotted hashes. Don't double-click on it. If you double-click on it, you're going to create what's called a click event that we're going to talk about. Single-click on it to select it, and then once I selected it, whoops, I can go down here to the Properties window. Am I in? Yes, I think I'm in. Got to get in the window. Actually, I'm going to resize here for a minute so you can see everything. Go down to the form is selected. I can go down here to the Properties window, and all objects have properties. Some objects also have methods, which are they can do things, but this object has a lot of properties. So you can see there's different colors, there's all kinds of things that I can change. But one of the things that you can change, let me find it here, you can change what text is displayed. That's a text property, I'm going to call it. And this you can call it however you want. There's no rules about spacing here or capitalization. Give it something meaningful. So it's called a Hello World Enhanced. See, it shows up there. And as I go down, I can also change the name of the form. So it says design and name. This is where I can change the name of the form, and it tells you a little information when I select indicates the name used in the code to identify the object. So there were two ways I could have changed the name of this form. But good programming practices is right from the start, start correcting all of the default names to meaningful names for all of the objects in your program. So back to our PowerPoint slide, which helps keeps me on track. So I said that everything, change all the default object names to meaningful names and change the properties as needed. So what property I changed the text property, which is the property that's being displayed right there. I can even change the little picture that's being displayed there. That's in here somewhere. I changed the text property, and I changed the default naming of the form as required. I changed default object names and to meaningful names and change properties as needed. So everything that has a default name has to be changed. On this form that I have shown here, there's a button 1 and a button 2. You cannot leave them as button 1 and button 2. You have to rename them. You cannot leave form 1 as form 1. You have to rename it. You cannot leave the namespace. I'm going to circle all these things that you have to remember to change. Grab my pen here. All the things that you have to remember to change. Whoops. What happened? Okay, got it back. So let me circle. I said I was going to circle everything that remind you, everything that has to be changed. You have to change the namespace out of this default naming that it gives. You have to change what form 1 is called out of the default name. When you create events by clicking a button, these are called click events. They are automatically given this kind of a name. Button 1, button 2, click. Everything with default names has to be changed. So here's an example with everything is changed. My form name is changed. When I change, it's kind of nice. When I change right here, it'll automatically change right here. I have to change. Let me show you. I'll give you an example of changing the click event names. These are called methods. They do something. So name but if you name the project when you create it, the namespace will automatically be correct. Most of the time in the homework, I'm going to tell you what to name your project. Okay, moving on. So this is things Reminder, did I tell you to rename all your identifiers? Identifiers are the names of objects and controls. That is actually a vocabulary word that you need to know. So C#, unfortunately, has quite a bit of vocabulary that you have to know. So identifiers are the names of objects and controls. This is an important term for you to understand. Properties, all objects have properties. That's like their color, their numbers, their size, whatever. Properties can get changed as needed for, the application. And let me show you how to fix a screw up. You fix the screw up by right-clicking it and renaming it. Don't try to just type it in because it will make a terrible problem. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go back over here to my code that we're using. I changed Hello World Enhanced, nothing special about that. But what if I messed up and I just said, I want to change the name right here. There's the name, and I enter it. This yellow bar, this yellow light bulb here says, there's a little pop-up thing that you can't see it all on your thing. It says light bulbs like this show you potential fixes to issues in your code. Click on them and press. So anyway, it's warning you that you have a problem right now. It's because when you create this form, there's some hidden parts of the program that you don't see right now that we're using. The program that actually creates the form right now is part of what's hidden to you. And I've screwed it up right now. If I try to see, these yellow squiggle lines also say that things are messed up right now, all because I renamed this improperly. So let me right click and rename it properly. I still have a conflict. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how you can get yourself in trouble, because right now I've gotten myself in trouble. Oh, nope, it turned green. I'm okay. And you can be sure, just run the program. I know it doesn't do anything yet. Run the program. I get no warnings down below. There's the program running. It does absolutely nothing. Close it. Okay. So I fixed my problems. I renamed things correctly. So we have some rules for naming controls, and the names are called identifiers. Remember, the name of the control is called an identifier. We have some rules and we have some standards, both. Rules are like if you screw up a rule, you're going to get a syntax error and your program's not going to run. So valid identifiers in C# have to use these rules. An identifier, remember that's the name of our control. An identifier must start with a letter or an underscore. Can't start with a number, can't start with a special character. But after the first character, it can contain numbers, letters, connectors, that's like underscore, etc. It can contain some special characters, but not all. If in doubt, try it out in Visual Studio. If the identifier is a keyword, it must be prepped with an ampersand. Remember, the keywords are special words in C# that have meaning from a programming point of view. Matter of fact, if you go to the Microsoft website, the .NET framework, oops, let me get it here. If you go to the Microsoft website, here's a Microsoft website. It's the .NET framework. There is all kinds of documentation for whichever language that you're working in. We happen to be working in C#, and so if I go to the C# guide, it takes sometimes a bit of searching to get through the Microsoft website, but there is a list of keywords for C#. Here's all of the keywords. We'll start using them extensively, but these are words that have special meaning in the language, in the coding, and so they already have a meaning attached to them. You can't use them when you're naming any of your identifiers. So where are we now? What is next? Okay, so let's a few quiz. Which one of these identifiers are valid? I think I will just, you should pause your YouTube right now, take a look, decide if it's valid or not. Okay, I'm going to tell you the answer. Let's see, I think I'll just use a pen. This one is valid, begins with a letter. Doesn't matter that it's capitalized or not capitalized, so that's good. Same with this one. This one's also good. This identifier, although it looks like calculate tax should do something, this is not valid because it has a space right here. Next identifier, proposed identifier, is valid. Doesn't matter if I put an underscore after the first letter. That's okay. The next one, as we've been using, is valid, and not only that, it's good form. Valid, valid. Believe it or not, this one I think comes up valid, but it's got some weird rules on it. But like I said, if in doubt, check it out check it out by trying it out on Visual Studio. Our standard is not going to allow you to name something like that, or I'll give you points off. Public is a keyword, but because it starts with an ampersand, this one ends up being okay. This one's not okay. It has to start with a letter. Capital P with a public. I think this one is okay. We'll have to try it out. And believe it or not, this one is not okay because it has this here followed by that and some numbers in between, and that is a formatting issue saying that that's an unsigned int number. So that's an obscure one. So, but basically remember the rules. First of all, must start with a letter. Oh, letter or underscore is okay. Yes, letter or underscore is okay. I don't like things starting with an underscore because I don't like typing underscores. But that one is okay. Okay, so that one is okay. Must start with a letter or underscore, no other special characters, but I did show you a weird exception. And after the first character, you can put other things in it. So, but this was a weird exception right here because that says that this is a certain format of a word. So, strange exceptions there. If in doubt, try it out on Visual Studio. So we have these rules that you have to obey, rules for naming the identifiers. So identifiers are for naming the controls. Identifiers will be for naming parameters later on, different things, different objects. So, but we have conventions. They're called coding conventions or styling, coding style. This is really important. So if you work somewhere one day where you are programming, your company may have a certain style that they insist that their code looks like. So it's very important because later somebody else will look at your code and they have to be able to read it and they have to be able to follow what's going on. So our style is, first of all, you have to obey the rules, but then we have some certain consistent naming conventions that make the code more usable. And if everybody's consistent, like you know that something started with Pascal casing or something started with camel casing, it makes it easier for somebody else to work with your code. And usually in a programming environment, you're doing a piece of a code and everybody's doing a piece of a code and it has to all come together. So some of the style that I'm going to insist, style or convention that I'm going to insist in this class comes from Microsoft. We want to follow the Microsoft convention. And so there's a link down below. It's the same web page I showed a moment ago that had the list of keywords. There's a design guidelines and capitalization conventions. So I'm going to go over those for you, what our conventions are. So when you name a control, remember that you're naming the control, the name is called an identifier. You need to name it with a noun or a noun phrase, and you need to use Pascal casing. So this term Pascal casing means you capitalize each word that you've blurred together here into one name. So the P is capitalized, the C is capitalized, and Pascal casing means you start with a capital. The alternative is called camel casing, and I'll give you here an example of camel casing. There is a case where we will use camel casing. This is camel casing. Let me do an example here. Text box. This is camel casing. So you see, camel casing has every word in the phrase starting with a capital. Looks like this is supposed to look like camel humps. That's the idea. But the first word is not a capital. So these are the camel humps in the middle. So that's why we call that camel casing. So some things will be camel cased and some will be Pascal casing. So naming our controls. They must be named with a noun or a noun phrase, and it has to be Pascal casing. Use adjectives in your description. Be descriptive. Do not abbreviate. I know it seems like maybe your names will get long, but that's okay. Be descriptive. Do not abbreviate. Sometimes people come up with some weird abbreviations, and I don't even know what they mean, how they came up with it. Do not start with a verb. This is for methods. Methods are pieces of code that do something. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So examples for naming your controls. A quit button. Yeah. So button is a noun. There's an adjective. It's a quit button. It's describing the kind of button it is. This one's not a good one. It should be a birthday label. A hello form, a birthday text box. Okay, so that looks good. These are good examples of naming a control. You are graded on following the conventions. You do not follow the convention, you will get dinged. So anyway, I'm going to show you my grading sheet. You will, when you submit your program online, and then it will come back to you graded, and there will be attached a grading sheet. Here is the grading sheet. So this will come back with every graded program that you have. You'll find a grading evaluation sheet with every program that you submit. So this is how every program, whoops, don't want that. This is how your every program will be graded. So you have 10 points. It's actually every programming problem is worth 25 points. 10 points of it is, does the project work? Does the program run? Did you just meet all of the specifications of the problem? It does what it says it does. It looks like it's supposed to look. It runs when you submitted it to me. Then that's 10 points of it. The rest of your points, the rest of the 15 points, are on conventions, standards and conventions. Did you name the class correctly? Pascal casing with a noun. Pascal casing, event handlers are methods. They do something. So it needs to have a meaningful name that begins with a verb because it does something. Methods are, like I said, something that does something. Event handlers are just special methods. Methods are usually the ones that you write by yourself, but you have to give them a name. The properties are also starting with a capital letter. If you create something that has its own, if you create something later on in the course where you create properties, it has a capital letter. Identifiers. Yeah, I think I have an inconsistency because earlier I said the identifier starts with is Pascal casing. Identifiers look like camel casing. That's how I'm grading you. There's inconsistencies because when I look at the Microsoft documentation, a form starts with a capital F, and identifiers later on, like buttons and things, start with a lowercase f. So let me resolve that. Let's just say identifiers. Let's stick with my grading form. We just have to stick with some standard. And name constants, we're not there yet. We'll get there. And then finally, do you put comments in your code, which we'll talk about. If you are required to put comments in the code, it helps somebody else who's looking at it know what you did. So I need to double check that the identifiers are going to be camel casing for this class. See, this is an identifier and it started with a capital, but then buttons and things started with a lowercase, so I need to resolve that for what our standard will be. Yeah, I named it capital because Visual Studio did, but then I said grading was not. Okay, let me resolve that. By the end of this video, I will resolve that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the code. How is it organized? What's all that stuff in that form that's automatically created? So when your form is automatically created, there it is. You see a lot of things are already put into your form right from the start before you even write any code. So let's break it down and look what it is. The things at the top are called using directives. They indicate what, I know it's a weird word for you right now, namespaces in the .NET framework the program will use. Basically that means that there are pieces of code already written for you that creates a form, that creates a button, that creates a lot of the things that you can use. So these are already created and you can just use them and rename them. The fact that they are already created is called the .NET framework, the .NET framework, written right here, .NET framework. Those are things that you can already use. You're working within this framework, so you can use all of these objects that are already created for you. When you put at the top of your code using directives, it says which one of these chunks of code that your program can have access to and use. But it turns out that in the beginning we don't use very many of those things. If I look at this piece of code that we've done right now, which doesn't do much, I only see that we're using system.windows.form because it's dark. But some of these other things I don't think we're using. I think if you deleted it, this program, well, we have to use system, that's no doubt. Not sure why it's not darkened right now. But some of these other things, we're not using drawing, we're not using data, we're not using some of these other using directives right now. You could take them out one by one and see when your program falls apart. So anyway, my program can potentially use all of these different using directives, which are which namespaces, which are chunks of code in the .NET framework that the program can use. Then we go and create our own namespace right here, which generically is first called a Windows Form App 1. So what is a namespace? A namespace is kind of a container, and I want you to see right now this kind of like container organization. On the high level is the namespace. That's the outside enclosing container. And within the container, what's inside the namespace is between these two parentheses, the opening and closing parentheses. So this is the namespace and its name. We created a namespace, and these two curly brackets here indicate what's inside the namespace. So the question is, what's inside this namespace now is a class. And you can have more than one class, but right now we're only going to have one class. We are going to use a Form 1 class. So in this area on the inside is a class. And what's in the class is, again, contained within these opening and closing curly brackets. So the namespace is what's between these curly brackets, and the class is what's between these two curly brackets. And then within the class, we can have different methods. The only method initially remember, a method is something that does something. Initially, a piece of code that does something. Initially, we only have one method right here. It's a method called form1, and what it does is create the form for us. That's what this method does, and it initializes it. So this little piece of code in the yellow right here creates the first form for us called form 1. And what's in form 1? What's between these curly brackets? That's what's in the method. So let's look at a little bit more of a program now. Here is our Hello World program that we did. So identify the parts of Hello World. Right here is our using directives. Okay, so this is nice that this one is actually using system and using system.windows.forms, but it's actually these grade-in things are not being used by this current program. These are using directives. Notice here's the namespace, and in Visual Studio it's kind of nice because it aligns up the opening and closing curly brackets. So there's our namespace. What's in the namespace is enclosed in these curly brackets. We have one class, one form, because we only have one form class in this program, also enclosed in these curly brackets. So one of the mistakes that may happen as you're programming is you may accidentally delete one of these closing curly brackets. But if you don't have this structure where your class is contained within your namespace, you're going to get errors in your program and it's not going to run. So you have to make sure that you have these pairs of curly brackets there. And then finally, inside the class, you have methods. So where are our methods? Here is the method that creates the form. And you can recognize a method because there's always going to be parentheses with a method. That means initialize component is also a method because you see there's parentheses there. But where's another method that we have? Here's another method. Here's a show message button that's a method. It's the header of the method right here. And what's in the method is these curly brackets. So what does the method do? It's whatever's in this curly brackets. It happens to be a message box show. And then looks like we have one more method. This one right here called the click to quit button. And what's in there is just a piece of code that will close the form. So there are in this program we are working in this namespace that we created. We have one class included in that namespace, and we have one method, two methods, three methods. Methods do something. First one creates the form. Second one is called a click event method. If the user clicks the button, something's going to happen. And the third one is also a click event method. So you're going to click some button and the form is going to close. So I've been mentioning this word event handlers, so let's talk about it a little bit more. An event handler is a method, that means it does something, that executes when a specific event takes place while the program is running. So in our case, our event handlers, the only one we've learned so far is called a click event. So how do you create the event handler? We already did this when we created Hello World, but let's look at it for a moment. I'm going to go to the toolbox, put a button on the form. I know I'm going to need two buttons, so I'm going to put a second button on the form. There it is, button 1, button 2. So as long as I single click on the button, I can go down to the property window and I can change whatever the properties are. I don't want to call button 1 button 1. I might call it the... See now notice that it's lowercase. The identifier is lowercase when I'm down here in this method levels. Maybe we should follow the convention that whatever... I got to be careful here. Okay, I got to resolve this before the end of the presentation. So button 1 is the show hello button. And I used camel casing because the button was named generically with that camel casing. So I renamed the button, but I want to change its text property. So I'm going to go down here to wherever its text property is. I know it's in here. Text property, where are you? for a message. Okay. Oh, and I can't read it, so I'm going to resize it. So I am actually changing the size property when I do that. One of the things I kind of like, well, okay. And then button 2, I'm going to rename its identifier. Go where it says design, button 2. I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it the quit button. Okay, and I need to change its text property because it just says button 2, default text property. Text property right here, I'm going to call it just quit. Okay, so I've changed everything, but if I go look underneath at the code, nothing is happening down here. Be very careful. Do not double click on things until you want to create some kind of event. So to create an event handler, you double click, as we saw this, double click on it, and a method will be created right here, a special type of a method called an event handler. Now, if you renamed button 1 to show hello button, then the method will automatically be a show hello button click. So, which saves you renaming things manually when you get to the code. You won't maybe always remember to do that. So you can again come over here and right click on the code and do a rename if you forgot to do it. So I've created the click event. Still nothing will happen. If I run the code, nothing really happens. So the thing we know how to do right now is message box, not message, but message box. Using this nice feature, looking ahead feature, it's called an IntelliSense. It senses what I'm typing and gives me choices. So it's called IntelliSense. So I can double click over here and I get the message box, dot. What's it? So I have choice equals. I have some choice equals, reference equals show. The only one we know right now is show. And there's a red squiggle there. See, a red squiggle means that something is not right. If I hover over it, I can get some information. Right now it's overwhelming information. Tells what it does. But if you notice, it says show has to be, there's an argument there. There has to be something in parentheses. So something in parentheses. Hello again. And you have to have a semicolon at the end of the line. If I don't, I'm going to get a red squiggle there saying something's wrong. The little red squiggle says, what does it say? A semicolon is expected. So that's nice. It reminds me. I put the semicolon there. So what can you say about this? This must be a method because I see something in parentheses. So that is a method also. The show method has been written for us somewhere else, part of the .NET framework. So now if I run the program, my program is running. Click for a message. I get hello again. It works fine. But quit doesn't work. Nothing happens because I didn't do anything for quit. So I can do the same thing for quit. Lovely. Back to the PowerPoint, just reminding you, when you double click on it, you create an event handler. In our case, it's a click event because something happens when a user clicks on the object. So it's an event handler, but it's a click event. And it will add a method to your source code, but the method has no body until you put something in it. Right now we put messagebox.show. So button controls have this method associated with them. So button controls have properties and methods. This is an important concept. This object called a button has properties and it has a method associated with it called a show. So very important. I'm going to keep, I know it sounds like a foreign language, but I'm going to keep reiterating it. So a little bit more about methods. In a few weeks we'll do a whole lot of methods where we write our own methods. But let's look at this click event method that we had. Well, here's one called show message button. You can recognize a method because methods always have parentheses here. So you may have something inside the parentheses or you may not have something inside the parentheses, but you can recognize them because it has parentheses. When a method is defined, this part up here is called a header, and there's no semicolon right here, and the stuff between the curly brackets is the body. Methods do something, so name them starting with a verb. It's a show message button. Show is a verb. Yeah. They do not have a semicolon at the end. This is actually a declaration. Okay, you're declaring a method. And the body of it is enclosed in the curly brackets. So let's learn a new control right now. It's called a label control, and put it on the form. So labels display text on the form. Labels have properties. You know, you can change the font size, you can change the color, you can change it to be visible or not visible. So those are properties associated with a label. So let's show you some labels. Look at my computer there. Okay. Here's our form that we're working with. We've only worked with a button so far, but we can put a label on the form. Double click. There's now a label on the form. It's generically named label 1. So what are you going to do? You're going to select it by a single click. Go over here and change under design. Change it to, I'm going to call it a user info label. User info label, or directions label. Directions would work. Anyway, and then what is it going to say? It probably is some instructions to the user, so I'm going to change its text property. It says label 1 right now. Hey user, click. So there it says, hey user, click. So let's make our code a little bit more interesting right now. I have click for a message. I'm going to put another button on here. Button. Here's another button. Now, since I renamed the other button, I have button 1 again. So I'm going to make this button say, first of all, let's rename it. Other message button. And what's going to be displayed? What's its text property? Its text property is going to say, no, click me. That's its other text property. So I like that. So click for a message, we already know what that one does. Click for a message will say hello again. No, click me. Let's make a click event for that and use our label. So here's the other message button.click. The method doesn't do anything right now, but you know what? I want it to do something. So I want to change what the label says. I want the label now to say, you picked the right choice. So, oh, I forgot what I named that label. I could go over here and I could say, oh, what did I name it? Go down here in the property box, find out what I named it. Other message. Okay, I call it the other message. And I could go over there and I can find it, because now it's in our IntelliSense lookup thing. And I see it right there. There's the other message button that I want to use. So I can put it on there. Other message. dot. There's a show, but you know, I don't want to show. I want to actually, the thing that I want to do, I want to change its a property. So you see these little wrenchy things? Those are properties. So the other message button dot text, I'm going to change its text property, and I'm going to say it equals, put a string, this is called a string literal, inside double quotes, other message dot text equals, I'm going to put a string literal in there. You picked a good choice. Oh, and I have a red squiggle right there. That means I forgot something. It'll tell me what I forgot. It's the semicolon that I forgot. There it is. So, now if I run the program, here it is running. Hey user, click for a message. Hello again. Lovely. Ah, maybe I'll click this one instead. No, click me. Click. And it says, you picked a good, oh, I didn't give it enough space, but it says you picked a good choice. Oops, I didn't change the label. I changed the text property. Let's do one more thing. Quit. Oh, quit. I didn't program quit yet. Oh, foo. Okay. Other message button dot text says you picked a good choice. I'm going to change the label that's on the form. I'm going to change this label right here. So what is this label's name? I can go over here and find over here what this label's name is. User info label. There's another way. Sometimes I get tired of selecting it and then going to see what I called it. The other way that you can do, forgive me if it takes me a moment to find it. Sometimes that happens. You can expand out this. No, not this one. There's our, expand over here in the solution window. Expand this. Get over here so you can see it. Actually, do this. So there was Form 1. Expand it. Form 1 Designer, and under Form 1 Designer, oops, again, Form 1 here, under Form 1 Designer, you can see everything that you've defined in there. So I have a form defined, I have a Show Hello button, and it tells, this is what it's telling you, it's called a Show Hello button, and it's getting its properties from a thing called a button. You have a Quit button, you have an User Info label, and you have an Other Message button. So everything is right there, and this is just going to take you time if you want to find the name of what you've called things a different way. But I can find the name of what I called this by selecting it and going over here and looking in the properties window too. So I did call it a user info label. So let me go back to my code, and I said I wanted to change it. So I'm going to put another action in here. Oops, do a return. User in, come on, it should come up. User info label dot, well, it came up. I don't know why it was lagging. Text, whoops, sorry, that's my drawing pad. Dot text equals good job, and put my semicolon in there. Okay, so now what do you think is going to happen when we run the program? Run the program. Oh, I have an error. I'm just going to say no. Where is my error? Look, I had a typo right there. Fix that. Run again. Here's my program running. Click for a message. That does the same thing. Boring. Says, hey user, click. And oh no, click me. And so the text property of the button changed. You picked a good, oh, I should have changed this. But up here, this other label also says good job. Quit. Ah, I forgot to program quit yet. I haven't programmed quit. You could also change colors of the button, size of the text, all kinds of things like that. So those are some of the properties you can change. See, we did this. We changed label 1. We made a program that would change the what was displayed on that first label. I additionally did something that would change what was displayed on a button. But let's look at a piece of this code for a moment. We have a user message. I think I called mine slightly different. I called it a user info label. Okay. The user message.text. Let's look at the structure for a moment. This is an object identifier right here. User message or a control. It's an identifier, and this is a property. And then we have this equal sign, which is called an assignment operator. I don't remember if I gave you a question about that in your homework. This is an assignment operator. It's not an equal sign, it's an assignment operator. So we assigned the text property to a new value, which is you made a good choice. This thing, go down. What am I doing? That's the assignment operator. This thing right here is a string. It has to be enclosed in double quotes, and it's actually called a string literal. So lots of terminology. Yes, that's the way it goes. More label properties. You can put a border around your label. So you go over there to property window, you can find border style. There's a fixed 3D and a single line. This is fixed 3D. This one is a single line. You can change the size of it. There's an auto size true, which will make the border fit whatever the text is. There's an, if you turn it to false, you can make a bigger space. So that's everything I think almost that I want to cover in this lecture. It says do a president example, which is a little bit more of an extensive programming example that I'm going to do. So I will do that in a moment. But before I do that, I want to talk one more thing about our coding standards, and that is that our code, our source code is that text stuff that you're writing. It has to have comments associated with it. And I said comments explain how parts of the code work or give information about the business or the programmer. Uncommented code is a terrible, terrible thing because you go back, somebody goes and looks at your code and they can't understand what you did. And even a month from now, you may not understand what you did. So there's two different kinds of comments that I'm going to show you about. One is called a block comment. Block comment starts with a slash asterisk and ends with an asterisk slash. And so at the top of every program, you have to put this information. You have to put who the programmer is, your date, what problem you're doing, and a description of the problem. This is called the preamble oftentimes. There's another kind of comment called a line comment. It's a single line, and it starts with 2 slash marks. Notice that Visual Studio IDE will automatically change the colors and make our life nice. These are called line comments. Every method has to have a line comment except for main, which is the one that creates the program. So if you make a click event, you better have a description of what that method does. So here's an example. My line comment says that this piece of code is an event handler for the no click me button control. So these comments are required. The other thing that you have to do is not put excessive white space. So I'm going to pull up an example here. So here is a document that says what our coding standards are. I'm giving you this as a handout, but you can also find it online on Laulima. So you must put a preamble in a block comment that says name, date, problem number, and a description of what the program does. Then you'll have your program. Here's your using directives. You must rename, oh, I'm inconsistent again. You must rename the namespace, and I said Pascal's casing. But you must rename it how the instructions tell you to rename it. Usually it's a problem number or something that tells you what the problem does. But it must be appended with underscore your name for me to grade your problem. This is the one place I'm inconsistent, so I may need to make a decision. Class also, I'm gonna go look up what the .NET framework says, and then I'm gonna fix it. Class, capital letter, has a noun, starts with a noun and has meaning. So this is a number speller comment. Each method, whether it's a click event or an event handler, each method has a line comment. So notice every method has a line comment that says what the method does, even if it's a click event or an event handler. If it is your method, it uses Pascal casing. So I did say if it's an event handler, it can start with lowercase because that's what Visual Studio does. I have totally confused the capitalization. So I'm going to go, yeah, sorry about that. I'm going to go with what the standard is, which this form I wrote up, this example I wrote up after looking at what the .NET framework has. So I'm going to change the grading sheet and this to be very consistent with each other, and this is the example you can look at, and make sure you look at it when you do your coding. The problem is that the .NET framework coding, not standard, coding conventions says method starts with a verb and uses Pascal casing, but then they go into an event handler in Visual Studio, and then it starts with camel casing. So they're kind of inconsistent with themselves. So we'll make a decision, and we'll call it the coding standard for this class. You cannot have excessive white space in your program, so there is only one line of space between methods, but not more. One line right here between each method, but not more. If you have somewhere in your code that has 2 lines of white space, you're going to lose a point on your homework problem. A control name is an identifier. It is camel casing. It is a stop button or whatever it is. It begins with a noun, but it can begin with an adjective and be a noun as well, so it can be descriptive. And then a property name is Pascal casing and has meaning. And here's a specific example. An answer label done with camel casing .text. Now text is a property that's already programmed by Microsoft, but it begins with a capital T. And here are our capitalization conventions reference. So this is the standard. You want to look at this standard when you're doing your homework. Even though the event handlers come up automatically as camel casing, I want all your event handlers to start with, I want them to be Pascal casing. So I'll make sure my grading sheet is consistent with that. This is the funny part right here. There, and no, this is not. This should be capitalized, and this should be capitalized. Definitely. Okay. All right. So we'll go with that.